It gives me tremendous pleasure to welcome a wonderful guest speaker today, Daniel Bennett of University of Louisville. He's an associate professor. He recently got tenure at University of Louisville. He's also the director of the Entrepreneurship PhD program at University of Louisville, and also the assistant director of the Center for Free Enterprise, which is sort of their public outreach arm in terms of entrepreneurship. He has a PhD in economics from Florida State University, and he is an editor at Small Business Economics Journal. For those of you who are new to entrepreneurship, day one, you met David Aldrich, who's the founder and editor-in-chief of Small Business Economics. And at a journal like this, the editor-in-chief also has action editors or associate editors or editors who are in charge of specific areas of research. And Danielle is one of the editors at Small Business Economics. So Danielle, thank you and welcome.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
And I will ask you my first question that I ask everyone. And the question is, Danielle, how did you get interested in entrepreneurship research? Did you always wanted to be a business professor and do entrepreneurship research?
Yeah, so I have a pretty roundabout story of how I got to the point that where I am today. And that story, it really begins when I was an economics master's student at Ohio University. I had a professor there, Richard Vedder, who sort of inspired me to think about public policy and directed me towards some classical readings in sort of political economy related to how this sort of like there's an entanglement between business and politics. So that sort of exposed me to thinkers like Milton Friedman and Adam Smith and Joseph Schumpeter and other sort of great thinkers. And from there, I actually went to Florida State, as you suggested, for an economics PhD. And there I sort of fell in love with public choice economics and institutional economics, and really got interested in sort of how a society's institutions influence economic development processes. And that research sort of led me to sort of think through what are the sort of the mechanisms here. And it really led me to thinkers like Schumpeter and Hayek and Kerzner, who pointed out the central importance of the entrepreneur in those processes. And so while I started off my career as a sort of an economic development person, I sort of started getting more interested in entrepreneurship. And actually, my first endeavor in the field was I got invited to submit a book chapter to a volume on economic freedom, entrepreneurship, and economic behavior, or something like that. And ended up writing a paper where I was looking at how I was basically building on Baumol's framework with productive, unproductive entrepreneurship, and how those, the institution society influence how entrepreneurs allocate their sort of time and efforts. And what I did in that chapter was sort of try to use that framework to explain how an institutions will influence how entrepreneurs allocate their time, and how that influences sort of the structure of economic inequality in society. And that was sort of like, I guess, the beginning of my pivot. After that, I just sort of started reading some more entrepreneurship stuff. I had the fortunate opportunity to get recruited to Baylor University as a research faculty from my friend Boris Nikolaev, who was in a similar position there. And so I went to Waco, spent a couple of years there working with folks like Peter Klein and Matt Wood, and starting to work more seriously on entrepreneurship papers. And at the time, I still was sort of like not sure that I wanted to sort of go full force into that field. I remember Matt Wood telling me, he's like, you can't go in like, with one foot in the door and one out the door. You're either all in or you're all out. And, I thought very carefully about that. And, I think my first paper sort of solidified the process that I went through, solidified that, like, hey, this is a field that I want to be involved in. That first paper, for those who don't know me, ended up in JBV. So my first project I started working on at Baylor was looking at how infrastructure investments influence entrepreneurial dynamism. And at the time, I got interested in that topic because it was sort of a ongoing, as a current political discussion. There was discussions on, doing some more infrastructure sort of stimulus. And so I was thinking, well, let's sort of like, they're talking about this, this is going to stimulate growth and create new businesses and stuff. Let's explore that. And so I started working on that project. And I got to admit that the first draft that I got of that paper was, very much written like an economics paper, with competing hypotheses and not a sort of coherent sort of like logic flowing through it. But I submitted the paper to JBV somewhat reluctantly, and I was fortunate enough to get an excellent editor there, Phil Kim, who takes a very sort of developmental approach and philosophy to editing. And fortunately, he sort of like he saw the novelty of the topic and saw it as an opportunity to sort of engage sort of a new scholar and help them develop the paper. And I was very surprised that I got an R&R actually, and through 3 rounds and a year and a half later, finally I got the paper published. But it was a really great experience. Like I said, Phil was a fantastic editor, and he introduced me sort of to the ropes of being in the entrepreneurship field, and navigating me through that process. And it's very different from economics. I won't go into that very much in terms of the style of writing, and just the tone of how you engage and with referees and editors is very, very constructive and developmental. And so I sort of like learned vicariously that hey, this is a different way of sort of doing research, and there's a sort of a small but growing community of scholars that are very welcoming to outsiders such as myself. And that was the beginning of my pivot. And 3 years later, I ended up getting a tenure track job as an entrepreneurship professor at U of L, and they're treating me well here, and I'm now involved in training the next generation of scholars in our PhD program. So it's been a cool ride.
And Daniel, we do have PhD students from Louisville as well as from Baylor in this session.
Yeah, I see some of them.
Yeah. So Daniel, one of the questions I want to ask you is, you mentioned names like Schumpeter and Kerzner and Hayek and Baumol. These are all sort of classical writers.
Yeah.
Right? They did their work, when the writing styles, when expectations were very different from what they are today. They wrote books and stuff. How important do you think is reading classical authors for young scholars today, or junior scholars today, PhD students, assistant professors?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think there's this view there. I think there's 2 views on this. The first view is that, hey, everything that they've written and has been said has been captured in the current, and that's important, is captured in the current state of the literature, so you don't need to bother yourself. The other view, which I think is, which I personally subscribe to, is there are a lot of ideas and rich insights that have not been explored in some of those classical works. So I think it's absolutely worth students' time to go back and read those. I know there's a lot of demands on your time, but I think there's just so many sort of deep insights that you can get from these early works that you miss if you don't do that. The other thing I want to say on this is that with Baumol in particular, his classic 1990 paper, I think most entrepreneurship PhD students have probably read that one, and they should. I think it should be a required reading for all entrepreneurship PhD students. But time and time again, I see his ideas misrepresented in papers that are published from even one paper. And I think there's just a fundamental misunderstanding of what he means by productive and unproductive entrepreneurship. I see a lot of papers saying, calling self-unemployment unproductive entrepreneurship. That's not what Baumol was talking about. He was talking about entrepreneurs who were using their time to basically influence the political process to allocate rents to themselves. And that's the fundamental insight from that paper that I think is missed a lot of times. Absolutely, I encourage students to read those papers. George Mason University's Mercatus Center has an excellent sort of fellowship program that a lot of the students that they provide funding and opportunities to come and interact with their faculty. And a lot of the readings in those are sort of these sort of classic political economy texts that give students an opportunity to sort of, and an incentive to read this stuff. So I would encourage students to look into those.
Wonderful. And those, there are some Alabama PhD students in this session as well, and they will find that I will be directing them to you to get more guidance on that issue
For sure.
of George Mason University. So let's move to the next question. As you know, one of your articles was on the reading list today, and the article was about populism, politics, political leaders. Where do you see, what do you see as the past, present, and future of sort of politics and entrepreneurship research? We were discussing in this session how almost all across all countries, politics is a sensitive topic, not to be discussed in polite company, and yet research on this topic seems to be publishing well. So what do you see?
Yeah, so that's a great question, particularly the part about the past, present, and the future. In many ways, this is a very emerging field of research in the domain of entrepreneurship, but in other ways, it's as old as sort of the Enlightenment era itself, because as I suggested, if you go back and you read Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, if you read Bastiat's The Law, like there are ideas about sort of the entanglement of politics and business and entrepreneurship in these books and pamphlets that were written at the near the turn of the 19th century, right? And so like these ideas are very old, and they were very much a part, I think, of economic thinking up until the neoclassical sort of revolution in economics, when economists got fascinated with mathematical modeling and kind of forgot about the entrepreneur. So certainly there's a long history of sort of thinking about the intersection between politics and entrepreneurs. But let's fast forward a little bit and talk about some of the current trends in sort of the literature and more contemporary stuff. So there's a couple of sort of related areas. One would be, papers or studies that are looking at entrepreneurs using sort of the political process, developing relations with government officials to, as a viable sort of what we call non-market strategy. And that, particularly this I think is more prevalent in transition economies. And so a lot of the studies are sort of in the context of, China or Vietnam, places like that, where it absolutely may be an advantage to or a necessity to sort of develop good relationships with government officials to protect yourself in the absence of, strong property rights and the rule of law. And so there's that strand where that literature, I think, sort of a shortcoming of that literature is that it sort of fails to address some of the sort of larger consequences of sort of, entrepreneurs investing their time in developing political relationships as opposed to trying to create values for their consumers, which is a very common thing that we teach our undergraduate students in entrepreneurship classes is, hey, you have to create value for your consumers. That's how your business succeeds. And I think that we sort of fail, or some of these studies, fail to consider, like, Baumol's argument that, this is rent seeking, this is cronyism, this is redirecting your efforts from, basically creating value through markets towards, basically trying to stifle competition or influence the allocation of resources to your firm. So there's that. There's also like a literature, I think, looking, my populism paper falls into this category, looking at how political changes or political actors may influence entrepreneurial decisions. And so this, I think, is also sort of an emerging field with there's a recent JBV piece by David Lucas looking at how governor changes at the state and local level influence sort of entrepreneurial decisions in at a regional level. So that's a very nice paper. Actually JBV just published another populism paper that sort of builds on our work that just came out. So I think there's a lot of, sort of opportunities in that area, and there's definitely interest in it. And then sort of another related area is sort of looking at the political ideology, right? And so there's in Ileana Maldonado Bautista, I think I probably butchered her last name. She was a Baylor PhD student and is now at Iowa State. She's done she has an ETP paper looking at sort of the political orientation and values of founders when they're going up for funding, and how, whether it aligns with their ideology aligns with the funder may influence their decision, right? Of whether they get funding. And so there's definitely, I think, some some interest in exploring that, and I think it's an opportunity if students are interested in that area. So check out Ileana's work. Also read MK Chin's work at Indiana. So he's more of a strategy top management team person, but like he's really at the forefront, I think, of investigating sort of ideology. So I think those are some of the fields that are, sort of currently emerging. I would be remiss not to sort of share an opportunity that's forthcoming at SBE. So we have a call for papers right now for a special issue on the political economy of entrepreneurship. We're very much looking for papers that sort of explore this sort of intersection between politics and entrepreneurship. And students, there's still an opportunity to submit. The deadline's not till June 30th. So.
And Danielle, some of the papers you mentioned are part of the reading list for today. So we had 4 papers, one of which was yours, but we also had the paper by Chin. One of his papers, and we also had a paper by the other Baylor student you mentioned.
Yep.
That's on finances and entrepreneurs. Yep. Ideology fit. But Danielle, you also review for journals, and you're also an editor. What do you look for in a paper? How do you decide if a paper has potential or not? I assume every author who submits thinks their paper has a lot of potential.
Well, let me preface what I'm about to say, that among the associate editors at SBE, I have the highest desk rejection rate, and I'm proud of that. And I'm happy to talk more about that and later if students have questions about why I desk reject. But I want to say I have a few things that I look for. I want to preface this by saying, readers have scarce time. They form quick impressions, and they will decide within minutes, if not seconds, whether your study is worth their time for consideration. And I say that because the introduction to your paper is essentially vital. Because as a reviewer and editor, I'm going to read that introduction, and if you don't get my attention and convince me in those first 3 pages that your study is worth my time, my impression is going to be to look for flaws in your paper so that I can, criticize it and recommend rejection. So spend time on the introduction, learn how to write an introduction. In my own writing, I do a lot of empirical analysis, but I spend, I'd say, the biggest proportion of my time in writing a paper is making sure that my introduction is strong, because I know that's what matters, getting people hooked up front. So editors and reviewers are no different. So what does a strong introduction entail, right? You should clearly establish and motivate the topic. You need to briefly summarize what we already know about that topic in order to identify what puzzle or gap exists in the literature, to ask a theoretically interesting and practically relevant research question, and explain to me how you're going to address that conceptually and empirically, and then summarize what you're contributing to the literature that we don't already know, right? So if you want more sort of guidance on writing introductions, Jay Barney has a couple of pieces out. One's the 2018, I think it's an AMR editorial, check that out. You have to read, and this should be like Shepard and Wickland's 2019 ETP pace on provides, it's an editorial that provides practical guidance on writing an entrepreneurship paper. So those two things should like basically be on your nightstand and be nightly reading, like your one of your religious texts, to make sure that you're sort of studying those things. And I absolutely come back to them time and time again, even though sort of I know what I'm supposed to be doing. So that those are essential. In addition to
And
well-written,
then the
yeah.
Wickland and Shepard piece you mentioned, it was part of the reading list for day one of the class.
Okay.
And we also guide them to the AMJ editorial on how to set the hook in
Okay,
the
great.
introductions.
Yeah, no, absolutely essential readings before you ever start writing, read them. So in addition to a strong introduction, as a reviewer, I'm sort of asking myself like a number of questions as I'm reading through a paper. As I've already mentioned, does it address a theoretically interesting, practically relevant research question? In addressing the research question, does the paper make a theoretical contribution supported by strong research design and convincing empirical analyses? If it's an empirical paper, right? Obviously, I don't ask that question if it's a conceptual paper, but not a lot of those wind up on my desk anyways. Sometimes they do, and I do my best with them. Are the theoretical arguments based on sound reasoning and logic? Do they employ an appropriate theoretical framework to sort of make the connections between those constructs? If the theory involves moderation or mediation hypotheses, does the reasoning support these non-direct relationships? And I say that because I often come across papers with that make sort of direct effect arguments when they're hypothesizing about a mediation or moderation, and so that's a problem. Another common error I counter is people using sort of mechanism-based arguments when they're developing a hypothesis around a moderation hypothesis. Well, I'm sorry, but mechanism implies that there's a mediation relationship. So try not to make that mistake. Another thing, do you have conceptual empirical alignment? Do your measures sort of reflect the constructs that you're attempting to theorize about when you're sort of testing these relationships? The next one is, are there fatal flaws in the research design or empirical analysis, right? If there are, do I think that these flaws can be resolved in a revision or not, right? One thing is, if you've already sort of collected a lot of primary or field survey data and you sort of missed the boat on something, like you're probably not going to be able to go back and redo that, and that's going to sort of be a death sentence for your paper. So if you're doing primary data collection, make sure you're sort of doing the background work you do to make sure you're collecting the data you need and measuring things the way they need to be done. Lastly is, does the discussion section clarify and expand the theoretical contributions of the study, describe practical limitations, and offer a meaningful reflection of the limitations? I think somebody has got their sound on here that's causing a little bit of background noise.
Yeah, can you keep your sounds off if you have your sound on? And Athena, can you mute folks if they have their sound on, except Danielle and I, of course.
Yeah. Or if you want to censor me, that's fine. Yeah, so those are the things that I look for when I'm reading the paper. It's
Wonderful.
a lot, but that's it.
And I think that's very helpful, because, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the desk rejection rates have gone up over time, and many authors are finding that their papers are now getting desk rejected. And so that leaves them with sort of what's going on.
Yeah. And so, I can speak to that. Lots of papers are getting desk rejected, but getting quality reviews and reviewers who submit thoughtful comments in a timely manner is also becoming more scarce. So, my one piece of advice here is, if you agree to be a reviewer, do a good job. Learn how to be a good reviewer and provide the authors with useful, constructive developmental comments, but also give the editor, something to work with. So your job as a reviewer is basically as an advisor to the editor, who's ultimately going to make the decision. So they need to get good input from you.
Wonderful. Now, before I open the floor to questions from the audience, I have one more question I'll ask you. Can you tell us about one politics ENT paper that you are working on these days? How did you come up with the idea? How did you put together a research team? I'm assuming you're not doing it alone. How do you decide which journal it goes to? There are so many out there.
Yeah, great question. So one paper that I'm currently working on with Chris Boudreau at Florida Atlantic University is a follow-up to our JIBS paper, which was on the reading list today, looking at populism and entrepreneurship. And almost immediately when we finished up our previous paper, we begun thinking about, what is we had, we got a good hit there, right? We thought, okay, we got some inertia here. This is, seems to be like a topic that was basically a green field. Like there's not any, we were the first, right, in the entrepreneurship literature to come out with something. So while we've got the inertia, let's start working on something else as a follow-up. So in that JIBS paper that the students have read, we talk about how entrepreneurship populism creates institutional uncertainty that sort of creates a disincentive for individuals to enter entrepreneurship. But we had very little to say about how populism might affect incumbent entrepreneurs, people who are already business owners. And so we started thinking about the strategic implications. And so what we did was, start thinking about, and again, this comes back to Baumol, okay? This was sort of like the original conception was like, well, perhaps entrepreneurs will shift their focus when you get a populist regime, because the populist regime, they like to sort of change things. They want sort of people to rely on the government. And so perhaps entrepreneurs will, shift their focus from market-based to sort of non-market-based activities. And so we collected some data from the World Bank Enterprise Surveys to start exploring this possibility. And currently, what we've done is we presented the paper, a working paper, a couple of times at different seminars, gotten some feedback, and are in the process of revising it. But essentially what we're finding is that populism does in fact result in a reduction in sort of market-based strategic initiatives, such as investing in R&D or, coming up with new product innovations. At the same time, it's also associated with an increase in non-market-based activities, such as trying to solicit government contracts, engagement in corruption. And so we're currently in the process of reworking our theory and collecting some additional data from different data sets that would help us to sort of more robustly examine our model. In terms of the journal target, we're still, I think we're going to wait until we're done and ready to submit to decide that. But we've discussed that a top sort of general interest management journal, or JBV, is probably our likely initial target for that one.
Wonderful. And thanks for that, Dan. What I took in my notes is presenting to get feedback at different seminars, which you see as an important step, a robustness analysis to make sure the results actually stand, in different conditions. We have Misha who wants to ask a question. Misha, as you ask your question, could you also mention where you are in terms of institution and your stage in the PhD program?
Yes, thank you. I'm doing PhD in Ariel University in political economy, and I have a background in behavioral economics and psychological counseling also. I wrote two theses on entrepreneurship behavior. So I'm trying to combine theoretical level of political economy, behavioral economics experiments, and entrepreneurship also. And that's why I have a question to Daniel. Hello, Daniel. It's about my experiences. What you can advise, suggest in the case when someone want to develop, let's say, bottom-up research framework for analyzing political engagement, business influence to the political process. Is it necessary to validate such framework, or there is some opportunity for young scholars to publish new ideas, new frameworks, and what you can suggest to them. Is it necessary to validate, or it's enough to try to provide some frameworks, ideas?
So Misha, thanks for the question. And thanks for sharing what you're working on. I think sort of combining political economy with economic experiments to study entrepreneurship is that sounds very exciting to me. I'm not sure I quite understand the question to, is it necessary to validate the framework? Is it more around sort of the experimental framework you're talking, or the theoretical experiment? Can you clarify?
I mean, I'm writing a conceptual paper
Okay.
that synthesizes some social science concept and political economy concepts that help to analyze bottom-up influence of entrepreneurship to the political process.
Okay. All right. So I think without sort of knowing more about your study in the 30-second soundbite, that conceptual papers are very difficult to publish. Well, good ones, will land very highly, and those take years to develop. So I applaud you for making that effort. I often tell my students I don't write conceptual papers because I don't have the skill set. So in terms of developing a conceptual paper, I think it's absolutely essential that your theoretical framing is very precise and robust, and that you're very clear in the constructs that you use to develop those propositions and relationships. I would absolutely encourage you to, if you have not already done this, to revisit sort of the classics in political economy and introduce those in your writing, because you will find that, that will influence who you will eventually get to review your paper, and, based on how you frame the arguments, who you're citing, etc. And I think there's still a lot of sort of rich, as I mentioned at the outset, insights that can be leveraged in all sorts of ways, for conceptual and empirical work. So I hope that helps, but please feel free to follow up if I didn't address your question.
Wonderful. Dan, I think João Fernando from Baylor is next.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Bennett, for the presentation. Greetings from Waco, first of all. I have a question about, just like you, I have a background in economics, so I have a particular interest in industrial policy or policies and their effect on entrepreneurship. I think, at least from my understanding, that the concept of industrial policy and the effects of industrial policy, they're pretty established in the economics literature. However, I see a potential gap in trying to explain this logic of the effects of industrial policy to entrepreneurship. And at least in my perspective, I see a lot of Bauman's productive and unproductive and destructive entrepreneurship framework, trying to be like the linking, the bridge for this to these areas, to these concepts. I would like to ask you if you have any particular research design or research idea that would probably help to answer this question, like what's the effect of industrial policy in nascent entrepreneurship, especially maybe using this more mainline economics framework that you mentioned, like public choice, social economics, new institutional economics. Like, do you have any idea on that?
Joel, good to see you. I know we've had some interactions before, and thanks for the greetings from Waco. I've got a lot of ideas on this. My problem is scarcity of time. The specific question about industrial policy, that sort of was a 50s, 60s era, sort of policy experiment that was, largely around smokestack chasing. And by and large, we found out that it's not very effective, and for many reasons. Public choice considerations at large there. That so in that regard, some people have suggested, and I think this is right, that sort of this new entrepreneurship or innovation policy is the new industrial policy. And so I think there's absolutely room for additional contributions in this area. Some of the Swedish folks have done some great work in this area. Well, they have fantastic data over there, but they've sort of analyzed a lot of these sort of some of them have analyzed some of these public choice considerations and found that, when you have a lot of subsidies for entrepreneurship, that what you end up doing is, basically attracting less productive firms to spend their to get those subsidies, and so you get this bommel reallocation on the market on the margin, I think. So I think, but I do think there's certainly more room for, and this is one of the goals of our SBE special issue, is to sort of encourage more work that are sort of taking a public choice perspective on entrepreneurship policy. So I studied at Florida State under, one of my professors there was Randy Holcomb, and I always remember this phrase because he's a sort of big name in public choice. He said, like, look, if you don't consider public choice, then you're basically assuming that we have an omniscient benevolent dictator for government, but that doesn't really make or public policy or economic. What was the phrase you used? So you basically said make economics policy relevant, right? So you really have to consider sort of what are the, just as economics teaches us, when we think about what are the incentives facing individuals and firms in making the decisions, we should also consider the same when we're thinking about the policy making process, as opposed to thinking that we can just come in and sort of wave our arms and things will be, perfect, right? Because people face incentives, right? And we have to think through those. So absolutely, I think there's room to use different political economy frameworks, one with public choice. There's also, I think, opportunities, and Maria Minetti and folks up at Syracuse are doing some great work, like taking an Ostromian approach to think about, actually more market-driven approaches to collective action, which is essentially what politics are in the end. It's just a collective action process, and so yeah, I'd encourage you to work on that. I think that's awesome. I don't know if anybody will hire you if that's all you're doing, but I would consider hiring you if I had an opening. So,
Well, Dan, that's very encouraging. But Tanya, you have next.
Thank you, Professor. So I've just completed my first year of PhD at the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad in India. And my area of specialization is public systems or public policy. So I see that politics is pretty fluid, and many seminars that I've attended around politics, or especially empirical papers, I've found that the audience has somehow succeeded in problematizing either the conceptual framework or the operationalization of those concepts. And if not the design, then the data, because data is not accessible or available. So authors go for coding of the data themselves. So given that the audience or the reviewers may also have an ideology of their own, does that not make the findings very susceptible to their own ideologies per se? And can we actually reach objectivity in political research ever?
So that's a great question, and I'll give an answer. I'm not sure if it's the optimal answer to the question or not, but I think absolutely, people have political biases, right? If they have their own sort of ideological standing, when they encounter something that contradicts that, the first thing that's going to go up is like, I don't like this idea, right? And so we have to, if we're doing research sort of that involves politics, I think we have to be very careful in how we're framing things in such a way that we're not going to be offensive to those who are sort of reading it. There's no fail-proof way of doing that, but we can avoid using certain language that might sort of trigger somebody to think differently. Another strategy, let me give you an example of that, right? So a lot of my research uses sort of the construct of economic freedom. To me, that's not a very controversial sort of idea. Has a long sort of history, but to some folks that you know, that triggers them to think that like I disagree with this person because because they have a different sort of political view. I've learned and adopted this over time. I learned, I think I learned this from reading Louis Dow's work at Northeastern University, who's an IB scholar. He uses the term pro-market institutions. So I've sort of adopted that construct, even though what I'm working on is economic freedom, because I find that people, for whatever reason, are, they understand the construct. They don't see it as being sort of politically motivated or politically charged. And I've had pretty good success in using that, I think. And I've told others to do the same, advised others to do the same. Another thing that you can do when you're, writing your stuff and presenting it is, you absolutely can strategically try to position your paper to get reviewers who you think were going to be open to your ideas. And this is where sort of the introduction again becomes very vital, because as an editor, when I'm reading a paper that's on my desk, I'm trying to think about who's going to review this paper, who can I find to review this paper, and oftentimes the clues are there in the introduction about what literature and authors this paper is most relevant to. So as you're crafting those introductions in those first few paragraphs, cite authors whose work is both relevant to your work, but also you think are going to be sympathetic to your ideas, and I think would help the paper get more traction.
So Dan, what I'm hearing from you is there are steps that authors can take proactively to reduce the pushback from the audience at conference presentations or seminar presentations and reviewers at journals who may have their own biases on a topic like political ideology. It doesn't protect it fully, but steps are what we can do.
Absolutely.
Perfect. John, you're next.
Hi, Daniel. Nice to meet you here. So I'm a second year PhD student from same university as Dr. Daniel, University of Louisville in Kentucky. So in your paper that we read today, I was just wondering, because you use opportunity motivated entrepreneurship in your as your DV. I was wondering whether we're going to have a different kind of or an opposite effect if we use rather a necessity motivated necessity entrepreneurship. I was just looking at the context of developing economy or developing country, or a better way to put it is to ask if there's any relationship between, if you think there's any relationship between necessity motivated entrepreneurship or necessity entrepreneurship and politics or populist discourse.
John, good to see you. I hope this wasn't the first time you've read the paper, because I know that it was assigned in our seminar.
Yeah, this is my second time.
All right, second reading. Okay. So it's a great question. It's actually one that came up in the review process as we were revising the paper. And I think we probably at least have a footnote or something in the paper that we did examine the results using necessity motivated entrepreneurship, and they were by and large the same direction as what we found with opportunity motivated entrepreneurship, but it potentially could be an area of further explanation, because there could be sort of alternative mechanisms or sort of contextual factors that might differentially, I think, influence opportunity versus necessity, or even other sort of types of entrepreneurship, such as high growth aspiration, etc. So, good question.
So Dan, before we move to the next question, I have a question for you. You mentioned how sort of these rent-seeking behaviors of entrepreneurs who sort of co-opt political institutions or political leaders or government officials happens in sort of developing countries. And you gave the example of Vietnam and China. But sort of, don't you think this can also happen in sort of parts of the sort of developed world? For example, in the US, Louisiana is infamous for its high corruption rate. So could it not happen there? in the defense industry, which is sort of, infamous for, paying crazy prices for what seems like mundane products. What's your views on sort of these things happening also in the developed countries?
Yeah, that's a great question. I didn't mean to say that they only happen in sort of these less developed transition economies. They certainly are, I think, ubiquitous phenomena. I think there's my point in saying that is the research that I've seen has mainly been in those contexts where the traditional transition economies, but they absolutely happen in Western contexts. And I think there's opportunities to, to further explore that. It tends to happen, in say the U.S. Like, yeah, there's a lot of corruption, but like the sort of the line between legal lobbying and corruption is maybe a little bit gray. And so yeah, I think absolutely there's it happens everywhere. I do think that there's a strong relationship between the extent to which it occurs and sort of the underlying institutional framework and how much it safeguards against that. So I think that when you have strong property rights and rule of law and in sort of a constrained government, that it's less prevalent, and therefore in a Obama framework that entrepreneurs are going to be incentivized to compete through market processes as opposed to political ones. But even in those contexts, it still happens. So
wonderful. Thank you. Shekhar, you're next.
Hi, Daniel. I was just wondering, I'm thinking aloud, but while I was reading your paper, so I was thinking that the present government or the leader of the ruling party would be considered as a populist leader. And then you say that, there would be decreased entrepreneurial opportunities. So there is a high net worth individuals leaving the country. There's a lot of data on that. But on the other hand, India is targeting or, trying to catch up with China on one side. And then we have a number of policies like Make in India, making the policies or ease working of or startups in India. So it's just how do you think or look at this scenario?
Yeah, so a great question. And in the paper, we go to, I think, great extent to try and relay that we're trying to study the effects of populism and not policies per se, because the type of policy actions that you are referring to, protectionism, make it home, things that might, favor domestic businesses or entrepreneurs over foreign ones, could be the result of a populist leader. They could also be implemented by a non-populist leader, right? There's no, being a protectionist, or nationalist or whatever, right? It could very well be, an outcome of populism, but it doesn't have to be. Any leader could invoke any policy that doesn't necessarily make them a populist. And so it's we've found it important to try and clearly distinguish between what is populism and what is policy. And it's important to control for policy and try to operationalize populism in such a way that it's reflecting there's different approaches to populism, but the one that we use, and one of the major reasons we use that approach, the ideational approach, is because it's all about sort of the rhetoric and the communication style that the leader is using that tries to create this sort of animosity in society, pitting like groups against each other, trying to create polarization between the group that is the people, right? And this is the coalition that, basically the leader is trying to bring together to support them. versus, you know, whoever the common enemy of this group is. And that's going to vary from place to place. That could be, you know, oftentimes populists like talk about the media being sort of the enemy, or, you know, financiers, or, you know, corrupt politicians. Like, so there's, you know, there's lots of different enemies groups. But populism is, so in this way, populism is a very thin-centered ideology, meaning it doesn't necessarily like entail a certain policy prescription, but oftentimes in practice, we see it attaching to a thicker ideology, such as socialism, which is more of a left-wing sort of ideological position, or nationalism, which is more of the right-wing sort of ideological position, which sounds to me like what you're describing in India. So, you know, I think it's what we try to do is, you know, be clear that we're sort of assessing populism and not the policy actions. Otherwise, you just can't make sort of comparative international analyses to analyze this sort of thing. Does it help?
Wonderful. Swaroop, you're next.
Yeah, hi Daniel. I'm a first year PhD student trying to work at the intersection of entrepreneurship, information technology, and of course, in a lot of other areas as well. My question is that in the context of a country like a federal country, large federal country like India, which is a simulation of a large number of territories, which are some of, I mean, most of them are bigger than some of the European countries. So if we want to analyze the impact of, say, not just populism, the impact of populism on entrepreneurial behavior and entrepreneurial intention, which is something like a DB, which might be number of companies creation, or number of, say, microfinance groups creation, with respect to how the regimes have changed. So how do you take care of, and how do you really grapple with the problem of the lag effect? Because a lot of policies, I mean, not just populism, with populism, there is some policies, or even with lack of populism, there is some policies which will have a long-term effect on, and that's where the problem comes. The next regime might not be fully responsible for some of the activities which has happened within the regime. And on top of that, we have this two-tier structure, the central government and the state government. Two-tier structure and rapidly changing, I mean, say, whatever, every 5 years, the changing government. So how do we really, a period of, say, 2 to 3 years might not be enough to take care of the lag effect. So how do we really grapple with this problem? Any experience or any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things there that I want to try to address. And the first is, yeah, so you've got these sort of sub-national regions in India, and I'm assuming that, you know, that they have subnational governments, and where you're having elections every, you know, with some frequency, right? And you're going to potentially get changes in the regimes. And I think they're probably democratic elections at that level, right? Okay, so I'd encourage you, and let me see if I can find this paper to drop in the chat. But David Lucas's paper, his 2024 JBV, it just came out like maybe a month ago, where he's using U.S. gubernatorial elections to see how changes in the governor at the state level in the U.S. affect different aspects of entrepreneurship. And he has a clever research, or what do you call that, a regression discontinuity, I think is what he's doing, where he's looking at elections that were decided on a very narrow margin in which the governor changed, as a way to sort of get good identification on there being sort of like an exogenous change, and then seeing, you know, using like a dip and diff type of approach. And so what that allows you to do is, you know, like track in the treated groups, right, prior to the event taking place, to see, you know, find comparison states, in his case, in your case, I think it would also be states, right? And, you know, seeing how they're trending before the event, and then sort of observing how they're trending after the event. And with that sort of looking at narrowly decided races, then you can sort of like say that, okay, this was sort of an unexpected change, right? And so what we're observing after the event, you know, reflects sort of a, you know, a causal effect. And so I think that could help. And you can also, in those type of research design, assuming you have panel data, you know, you can explore how long the effect takes place, right? So you can do an event study plot to see like, okay, are the effects immediate? Did they lag a little bit? How long do they persist? So that would be one approach. The other question that you had was, okay, well, you've got these potentially simultaneous changes at the state level as well as at the national level. Well, I've got a paper right now that we're just getting ready to resubmit to JBV, where we sort of propose a institutional contingency approach, and we're using a diff and diff in that paper. But so what you can do with a diff and diff in that is, you could find some sort of variation in federal policy and basically look to see if it sort of moderates your diff and diff estimates.
And so, Danielle, if I may summarize here, what I'm hearing you say is, for Swaroop, the issues may seem difficult, but we have tools in econometrics that can help us address these issues methodologically. And given that the vast majority of research in this area has already taken place in the US, which is also a federal system, I think a familiarity with that literature would help see how this issue has been addressed in the past, whether it's diff and diff or other methods. Perfect. So Besnik, you're next.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you for the very insightful discussion, Daniel. So I am currently pursuing a PhD on entrepreneurship, specifically studying entrepreneurial failure in the startup ecosystem. While reviewing papers and investigating the reason for failure and the frameworks already established, I noticed a strong relation between the business failure or entrepreneurial failure overall and the external or environmental factors, attributing failure mainly to the institutions, government, market, ecosystem, political approaches, etc. What I wanted to ask you is something that I didn't really find, a lot of information about, is political approaches, political perspective on the business failure in an economy, especially in an emerging economy. What do you think would be novel and innovative in order to check this relation between the failure, which is a very underrated and under-researched area in relation to the institutional theories, attributional theories, and probably political theories as well?
That's a great question, an area of exploration, Besnik. I think the area of sort of failure, entrepreneurial failure, is, I agree with you, it's under research. I think that's a lot of potential in that. Some of my own work has sort of looked at entrepreneurial dynamics and seeing how different sort of environmental characteristics or institutions or policies may contribute to either sort of entry or exit. And so that's that's literature that I'm sort of familiar with. But I think there's this perception that failure is a bad thing, right? That we should try to stop it. But if you sort of read, if you're familiar at all with like Austrian economics and market process, then a big part of entrepreneurship is experimentation. And anytime you do experimentation, you're naturally going to have, a lot of experiments that fail. And that's what I talk to my undergraduate students is, when you have a new venture idea, you basically have a hypothesis, right, that you're trying to test. It may go the way you think it's going to go to, it might fail. It's just kind of like scientific research. So I think maybe that, people have a little bit of a sort of misguided idea that we should prevent businesses from failing. But I think that maybe we want to soften the blow, right, so that we can encourage risk-taking entrepreneurship. And so I think there's probably some room to sort of look at indirect sort of policies that might sort of encourage entrepreneurship by lowering sort of like the fear of failure, right? And so that might be a thing like I don't know, instead of subsidizing entry, maybe we should subsidize failure, right? I don't know, like, so some ideas there. And also looking at sort of, from a political economy perspective, what are, I could rattle off sort of the unintended consequences of subsidizing sort of entry or innovation, but what are the potential unintended consequences or political failures that might result on sort of subsidizing a failure? So hopefully that gives you some ideas. I know there's some other questions I'll have to get to, but.
And Besnik, I would suggest you can reach out to Danielle afterwards and discuss more of this, because I think this is an interesting area of research. So Vetri, you're next.
Yeah, thank you, Professor. Um, uh, Dr. Bennett, I enjoyed reading all the papers that were then reading today, and especially your paper and how you have defined you have had various definitions of populism and the rationale for choosing the definition that you have chosen. Thank you. This is somewhat related to the definitions. The question that I'm going to ask now. There are certain concepts and constructs which are benign at its face value, but sometimes it gets politically loaded over a period of time because media picks up some of these, and they kind of load it with a lot of political undertones. An example is techno optimism. So techno optimism at its face value is a very benign term. Do I believe what is my beliefs about technology and how it's going to shape our society, right? But then so there's an article in Axios and I think other media outlets about how there is a certain group which is uh, which is uh, which is kind of using this techno optimism for their own political um, uh, ideologies, right? So um, if we are if I was the one who's going to use this particular construct in the academic literature, say if I'm going to introduce that, I'm going to create a scale for techno optimism. So what should be the right? Should we just change the name of techno optimism, or should we just use a kind of a disclaimer saying that this construct doesn't have any political connotations with what is found in the popular media?
Yeah, that's a great question, Venturi, and I'm not a construct development person, so I don't think I'm necessarily the best person to ask about this. Populism is one of those concepts that if you just sort of follow the media, you really have no idea what is populism. When we first started coming up with the idea for the paper, like, it was, we were just seeing populism in the world, and we wanted to study it. And like, we went to the, we naturally went to the political science literature where people have studied it, and so they've developed these different approaches and different ways to theorize about it, and different and even different measures of it. And so that's sort of like what we did, and that was a good learning experience for me, because as sort of the theory person on the paper, I took a deep dive into political science literature, which I like anyways, given my background. And so, we tried to make it as academic as possible. In terms of tech optimism, certainly that's a term I think you hear in the popular media. I don't know if there's any work. I would see if there's anything in the psychology literature that has sort of dealt with this or similar sort of perceptual variables, because that's essentially what it is, and that's what you want to develop is a perceptual construct that needs to be validated. And what other sort of, what are some, and as part of that exercise, if it doesn't exist, would entail what examining the validity of that construct, and whether it sort of it correlates with other related constructs that we might have, and also whether it's conceptually distinct from those. And so should talk to my about to be graduate Michael Arakri. His dissertation is involved in he does a construct development for his dissertation, so he would have more sort of insights on that. So reach out to him on LinkedIn if you have questions about that process. He's an expert. I'm not.
Wonderful. Lucy, you're next.
Thank you so much. You just mentioned that your PhD is in economics, and that also being an economics professor and also entrepreneurship professor. So normally I see like people very lucky after the PhD, for example, not in entrepreneurship and then do a postdoc and then become an entrepreneurship professor. But for like including me as well, directly after the PhD, you become a faculty member that's in a new field if your PhD is not from entrepreneurship. So this transition you just mentioned very, very hard in terms of publication. And one way is to find co-authors or attend wonderful seminars like this one and conferences. Are there any other suggestions for very young faculty member, like just out of PhD, directly become a faculty member in a new field and do publication in that new field? Any of the suggestions?
So I think I got lucky in terms of the stages that I went through in my I call it pivoting, because that's what we teach in entrepreneurship, is about pivoting, and so that's what I refer to this as. And I took, I also took a risk. I sort of left a job and was essentially a postdoc at Baylor. And it's interesting that you mentioned finding co-authors to assist in this. My first 2 publications in entrepreneurship are solo authored papers. And so I think that is important because it demonstrated that I have the skill set to publish in this field, and it clearly signaled that I was the one that did all the work and was capable. And I would advise all sort of young scholars to before you go up for tenure, to write and publish one paper where you're the solo author, because it may not be a tenure requirement, but it certainly signals that you can do theory, you can write an introduction. If your paper is empirical, that you have some empirical skills. Other times, you see people that they've got umpteen different publications, and they're never the first author on the paper, so you kind of wonder like what skills they actually have. And this is important when you go up for tenure, because as an external reviewer, what am I going to do with that, right? Like if I'm trying to evaluate whether a school should give someone a permanent contract, I want to give them good feedback, and I want to sort of evaluate the person on their merits. But if they're always 3rd, 4th author, then I don't know what their skills actually are, other than like convincing somebody to put them on a paper. So I would sort of also encourage solo authorship, or at least having some publications where you're first author with a smaller team. What other advice can I give? Go to the conferences that are essential for the field, right? So if you're trying to transition into entrepreneurship, you better be sort of applying to Babson College Entrepreneurship Research Conference. Go to AOM, go to the Entrepreneurship Social, because a large part of getting a job is building out a network, and it's important to sort of be where the other scholars are, and sort of trying to make those connections and talking to people and asking for introductions. And don't be shy to reach out to professors whose work is interesting to you, and set up a time to Zoom. I mean, like, one great thing about the pandemic is we all know how to Zoom now, so you can meet with anybody around the world and get a chance to sort of talk to them. But make sure you're prepared if you do that, right? Make sure you have some questions that are
Dan, I know we asked for 60 minutes of your time, and we are already past that. We have a couple of people who are interested in asking questions. Can we continue?
Yeah, I'm absolutely happy to do that.
Okay,
I'm enjoying
Masa, I believe you're next, and Masa is joining us from Iran.
Hello, Professor. Thank you for giving us this great opportunity. I appreciate Dr. Bennett to sharing valuable information with us. I read your paper, Dr. Bennett, and one part of your paper was so interesting to me. It was about the second hypothesis of your paper, populism, populace, and entrepreneurship, which said that strength of checks and balances of political systems could weaken negative effects of populism on entrepreneurship. I wanted to ask that would it be a negative point for junior scholars because if the hypothesis and the finding match at the end, because sometimes it sounds that the test fully designed or hypothesis was flawed.
I'm really glad you asked that question, because this is something I deal with my own graduate students on. And I try to convince them that, like, I try to talk about the ethics of research and writing, and, the research process, in theory, it involves, coming up with some hypotheses, collecting some data to test them, and then reporting your results. Students get misguided when they see paper after paper that have 14 different hypotheses and they're all supported, right? It leads them to think that all their hypotheses should be supported and they should all have 3 stars on them. Like, I try to stress that it's important to develop good theory based on sound arguments and logic that tell a coherent story about the phenomena that is being studied, to find the best data and use the most rigorous methods you can to test it and report the results as they are. Sometimes they're going to support your case, sometimes they're not. If they're not supporting your case, it doesn't mean your theory is wrong. It means the particular data or sample you're using doesn't support it. Maybe it's a problem with the data, not the theory. I think our Gibbs paper is a great case in point that you can publish at very high levels papers in which your hypotheses are not supported. If you take a close look at that paper, only one of our hypotheses is supported. One of them is completely the opposite of what we hypothesized about, right? So, and we had no connection to that journal. We're, the authorship team, none of us had ever published there. It's an international business journal. I have maybe 1 or 2 connections in that area. So the fact that we examined a novel topic, we did it in a rigorous way. We tried to be sort of, very, very transparent about our research process, and they published our paper. And another trend that I think is going to continue to grow is the idea of pre-registration, right? So everybody knows there's p-hacking taking place, there's data manipulation, like there's a lot of ethical concerns that are being discussed by journal editors and publishers these days. And so one thing that we're seeing as a result of that is the emergence of the option to pre-register your study. And what that means is you basically write the paper up until the data collection process. You develop your model, you test it, or you develop your research design, you develop your theory, you submit the paper to a journal, or you post it somewhere publicly to show that, like, hey, here's what we're going to do, here's how we're going to collect the data. Then you go out and you get the data and you test it and you report the results and you publish them, right? Regardless of what they are. And I think that's a positive trend. Another thing that I would say on this is that, how do I say this? Our field needs to get more serious about doing replication studies and focus less on, like, there always needs to be, if something's been done and it's, got 3 stars, it's a proven fact. It's not a proven fact, right? Like the idea of science, is that you sort of come up with a hypothesis and it doesn't actually become a theory until it's like tested out the wazoo and like you just can't falsify it, right? And then it becomes a theory. That's how science works. Our field management tends to say if you test it once with, you know, 200 observations, that theory's been proven. It's not been proven. You need to reproduce it, you need to replicate it, you need to extend it, examine the boundary conditions. So that's a long-winded answer to say that you know, be intellectually honest and do good science, and don't worry so much about whether your, you know, paper gets you know, all of your hypotheses are supported with 3 stars. And also I would say that, you know, in addition to the statistical significance, as an editor and a reviewer, I'm more interested in the practical importance of your effect sizes, right? If you're doing empirical work, I could care less whether your p-value is 0.05 or it's 0.06 or 0.11. What matters to me is like how important is that effect? So learn how to sort of interpret your coefficients and your effect sizes and explain those so that I can tell if, you know, something is materially and practically important.
And I will mention here that Danielle, Bennett, and Athena are organizing a replication caucus at AOM, Academy of Management Conference this year. So those of you who are planning to be at AOM, it's definitely worth checking out all the things they'll be discussing about replication. So Zakia, you get the last question, and then we will have to say goodbye for today.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Bishop. I very much appreciate Mr. Bennett lecture, and I thank you, Mr. Bishop, because I am learning a lot today. And since we started these lectures, I am from Qadayad University of Morocco. I'm a postdoc researcher on entrepreneurship. My work is mainly focused on firm growth, SMEs growth, and firm growth relate and the social values of entrepreneurs. How are they related to firm growth? So, in reading the paper of Mr. Bennett, I couldn't really refrain but to ask myself at the end about this question. Regarding the political values, mainly political values like nationalism or socialism are not some static values like personality traits or self. So they are keen to change and shift according to the political system, political regime, and entrepreneurs' knowledge gain about political process. Therefore, how can we safely conduct research about the effect of political values or other ideologies on entrepreneurship, knowing that maybe that these values might change over time within the same entrepreneurs with the change of context and with the person inner development, and not have a long-term effect, which might jeopardize the long-term value and contribution of our research. Thank you.
So Zakia, thanks for the question. Let me make sure that I'm understanding what you're asking before I try to respond. My understanding is that your suggestion that people's political values or ideology may change over time, over maybe the course of their life or over a short period of time, or is that sort of what you're asking? And is your sort of the basis of your question to understand how we can sort of account for those things when we're examining it?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, so I certainly acknowledge that, and I like to believe that people are open-minded and that their values and their ideologies in Bayesian, and I'll explain that in a second, and that their values and ideology and views of the world may change as they collect more information and sort of grow and mature. There's an old saying in the US that, if you're not a liberal when you're young, then you don't have a heart. But if you don't become a conservative when you get older, you don't have a brain. It's sort of a joke. But the idea sort of encapsulated in that saying is that, yeah, you do change your values as you grow and mature and you have new things happening in your life, you encounter new information, new experiences. I think what's important though is, at the point in which an entrepreneur might be making a decision of whether to invest or whether to pursue a certain strategy, whether to create a social venture and what they're focusing on. I absolutely think at the point that during that process that their values and their ideology are going to play a role in that process. I'll plug David Lucas again. He has a 2023 JBV paper where he's looking at what is it, political ideology, moral foundations, and social venture creation, something to that effect. So in that paper, I think I think it sounds similar to what you're doing, is he's trying to look at how people's values and their ideologies shape the type of ventures that they create. So how do you account for potential changes in those? Well, I mean, like, you would basically need to track individuals over long periods of time, and sort of measure and assess their values and their their ideologies to see how those might change, and how that might impact their entrepreneurial actions as they change. But I think that they tend to probably change very slowly. I don't know how many of you sort of change your values or your so your worldview on a daily or monthly basis, but I think it probably is a process that occurs over a long period of time that you would really have to have probably track people over decades to really understand. But my perspective on it is, at the point of taking actions during the entrepreneurial process, what values that individuals hold at that time is going to be what matters.
And then on that note, let's move to the last question for the day. So I know we asked you for 1 hour and we are at way more than that. So what's one advice you would give to aspiring entrepreneurship scholars?
So I have a lot of advice, and if you want to if you want to learn more, follow me on LinkedIn. I think I have a reputation of sort of spilling advice for younger scholars, so do connect with me there. I have a new post up today for PhD students who are about to join a PhD program, so that give you a flavor of the sort of posts that I'd like to share. One thing I would say for PhD students is learn not to take criticism personally, right? We're in a field in which if you think about us in the context of entrepreneurship, we are in a marketplace of ideas. Our research, we're trying to sort of sell those ideas to our audience, which are largely other scholars. And part of that sort of process is getting market feedback from others, and that feedback comes in the form of reviews or seminar comments, and sometimes those comments are very critical. I think our community tries to be constructive and developmental overall, but it still doesn't make it any easier that these ideas that you've been working on are not selling, and it can be frustrating, right? But you have to take that feedback as sort of a signal from the market, and sort of filter through it, right? You have to be you have to be discerning about what feedback is good and what is not, but not to take it personally, because other scholars are by and large not attacking you personally. They're sort of doing what they were trained to do, and that is sort of critically assess research studies and sort of give you feedback on what needs to be improved. And this is where I see a lot of young scholars sort of stalling out or getting frustrated, or is sort of taking that feedback very personal. And if you haven't submitted a paper and gotten a rejection letter from a journal yet, I highly encourage you to do that. And when you do, read the comments. My suggestion is you're probably going to be angry at first, and you're going to be tempted to respond to the editor and tell them how stupid they are, and but don't do that, right? If it's therapeutic for you to draft a nastygram and delete it, that's fine. But my suggestion is read those comments, put them aside for a couple of days, come back to them with sort of a fresh mindset to sort of try to filter through the weeds to see what's useful and what's not. The comment is, you have to sort of experience rejection to learn, right? Even my 5-year-old daughter sort of recognized this. We were having breakfast the other day, and she said, "Daddy, does making mistakes help us learn? Is it she said, does making mistakes is making mistakes the best way to learn?" I said, absolutely, it's the best way to learn, because I can tell you over and over again that don't do something because it's for whatever reason, but when you actually make that mistake yourself, the consequences are real and you realize it. And the review process is like that, right? You're going to make mistakes in your papers. Other people are going to receive them, maybe not sort of understand what you're trying to do, or have different ideas on how you can do that, and learn from that, right? And learn how to become a better writer, a better scholar, a better analyst, and don't take it personally, because if you take every sort of criticism personally, you're just not going to last very long in this profession, and you're going to have to find something else to do. It's a great field. It's great to be an academic, but you have to sort of get over that hurdle.
Thanks, Danielle. And on that note, let me say how much I enjoyed listening and interacting with you today. And as you could see from the participants' questions, they also enjoyed chatting and talking with you. Thank you for your time.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for listening to me for an hour and a half.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.